Hello, my name is Dan Vo, and today for National Galleries Scotland, we're going to continue our series of conversations on Ray Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema, and look for the queer connections that can be found. And joining me is going to be Cheryl Morgan, who has picked an iconic Harryhausen creature, which is Medusa.
I'm Cheryl Morgan. I'm a public historian, I guess, these days, because I do a lot of this LGBT history stuff. I'm also co-chair of an organisation called Outstories Bristol, which researches queer history in the Bristol and the Southwest. And my main specialism is trans people in the ancient world.
Well, Cheryl, you've actually picked a film creature with very ancient roots.
Absolutely, yes. I have selected Clash of the Titans, which I remember fondly from my youth. It seems much more clunky now than it did back then, but actually I think the creatures in many ways are acting better than some of the stars, so...
His name's Bubo.
Do you understand all those clicks and wheezes?
Perfectly clear to me.
I should start by saying that the story of the Clash of the Titans has been very liberally adapted from the original Greek myth. So in the story, we have, first of all, a princess called Danae who has been seduced by Zeus, and she's got a baby boy, and her father is very angry and sacrifices her by putting her and the baby into the sea. And Zeus is very angry in return and rescues her and destroys the father's kingdom. So the little boy grows up and is then sent by Zeus to a place called Joppa, which apparently is Babylon, if you look carefully at all the background and whatever. It wasn't in the original myth. The original myth, the kingdom of Queen Cassiopeia was in Ethiopia, which, you know, people tend to forget that. Cassiopeia and Andromeda should be black, and generally they are not portrayed as that. So back to the film, Perseus ends up in Joppa, and the reason he's there is that the kingdom is under a curse, that Andromeda was supposed to be married to a chap called Calibos, which is basically Caliban from The Tempest, which Harryhausen has stolen and put into the middle of a Greek myth. And Calibos, for various reasons, has offended Zeus and has been made very ugly. So the wedding between Andromeda and Calibos has been called off. He's upset. His mother Thetis, who is the goddess of the sea, is upset, and they've put a curse on the kingdom that nobody is allowed to marry Andromeda unless they can solve a riddle. And she gets sent the riddles in dreams by Calibos, so that, you know, they're really complicated so that no one can solve them. But Zeus, of course, wants to help Perseus out. So he gives him a bunch of useful things. They are a sword, a magic helmet, which makes him invisible, and a shield with a mirrored inside so that he can look at things without looking directly at them. He also helps him capture a horse called Pegasus, which is a flying horse. And here it gets really weird, because in the original myth, Pegasus is actually Medusa's child. In the myth, Pegasus doesn't appear until Medusa is killed. And the way that Perseus gets to fly is with a pair of winged sandals that he gets from Hermes. So it's a different myth. Anyway, he uses the magic helmet to solve the riddle, and then he and Andromeda are going to get married. But Andromeda's mother, Cassiopeia, foolishly says that her daughter is more beautiful than Thetis, who's the patron goddess of the city. Thetis is angry, and then Calibos persuades his mother to put them under another curse. And this time they are told to sacrifice Andromeda to a creature called the Kraken, who looks more like Godzilla than a giant squid. But this Kraken thing is throughout the film, and Zeus keeps saying, "Release the Kraken," which, you know, that's possibly the original. In order to save Andromeda from the Kraken, Perseus has to come up with a means of fighting this giant creature. And he goes off to see three witches, and the witches tell him that he needs to get the head of Medusa, because he's never going to beat the Kraken in a one-on-one fight, but if he has the head of Medusa, he can just turn the Kraken to stone and then he wins. So he then has to go off and kill Medusa to get her head, and that's where he needs the shield, so he can look at her in the shield rather than directly head on. And then he comes flying back on Pegasus and turns the Kraken to stone and rescues Andromeda, and they all live happily ever after.
Which isn't the way that it happens in the myths. So why is there a deviation?
The beauty of the Greek myths, there are many, many versions of them. And you can chop and change. I mean, obviously Harryhausen has played very fast and loose with that. But there are certain core elements, I think, of the story that are still there. What they don't do is give you the backstory of Medusa, which is a bit sad, because the Greek gods were an awful lot. And the Medusa was not always this weird snake thing. She was originally a very beautiful woman who was famed for her fabulous hair. However, she was so beautiful that she caught the attention of the sea god Poseidon. And he raped her, but he raped her in the temple of Athena, where she was supposed to be a priestess. And Athena got very angry about this and decided to punish Medusa, which is a terrible, terrible piece of victim blaming. I mean, it doesn't surprise me for Athena, because she's very much somebody who was always trying to be one of the boys rather than a proper goddess. So Athena punishes Medusa by turning her into this horrible creature that has snake hair and can turn people to stone with her gaze, but does not have a snake tail. That is entirely Harryhausen. Before him, Medusa had ordinary legs, and the bow is, as far as I know, that's made up as well. But I've never seen any other Medusa before his that had a bow, but it certainly makes her very effective. I think the bow idea was simply Harryhausen thinking about how can we make this creature more dangerous, because it's fairly obvious that if you could get close to Medusa, then she's not got much in the way of defenses, she's not got armor or anything like that. Obviously, you can't look at her, but you could actually engage her in hand-to-hand combat. But with the bow, firstly, she's got the means of picking off people before they get close to her. And secondly, it's something which will encourage her opponents to look, because they want to know where she's looking at to shoot at them. I think that was just Harryhausen thinking about the tactics of the monster. It was his idea that he should introduce that. Because he'd been looking at the myth and images of Medusa and things, and he'd noticed that although Medusa was this famously scary person, most of the images he found of her were actually quite beautiful. In particular, there's a famous statue in Florence by a sculptor called Cellini, which has Perseus holding up the head of Medusa. And Harryhausen was very familiar with that. He used the head of Medusa from that statue as the basis for his model, but he deliberately distorted it. I've got a little quote here. He says, "I felt we needed a striking and yet unconventionally hideously ugly demon." So he'd taken this quite beautiful head of Medusa, apart from the snaky thing, and turned her into this ugly monster. And he added the snake-like body. I mean, it's not even a snake, because it's a segmented body. Snakes don't have segmented bodies, but it has got a rattle on the end, like a rattlesnake. The reason I wanted to ask to talk about Medusa is that Medusa herself has this amazing history, that she's been picked up by all sorts of people for different reasons. And I've already mentioned the backstory in which there's this terrible victim blaming that happens to her, but also she is a female figure that everybody is terrified of. And that in itself is actually very powerful as a feminist symbol. So I've talked about the statue in Florence, which is exceptionally famous and also very, very good. But people have riffed off that and done that. I mean, Salvador Dali's done his, which is all sort of melty and weird and stuff. But there's a statue by a modern Italian sculptor called Luciano Gabatti. There's actually a replica of it on display in a park in New York at the moment. And it's a statue of Medusa holding up Perseus's head. And this has become very popular with feminists on social media. And around the time of the Me Too movement, there was a meme that went viral, which basically said, be grateful that all we want is equality and not payback. So there is lots of stuff like that of putting forward Medusa as a powerful feminist symbol that can be used in many different ways. And people have latched onto the idea of the Gorgons. Medusa is supposedly a Gorgon. What that means, well, we'll come on to that. But Gorgons as frightening females is something that also women have latched onto. So back in 1974, a trans woman called Sandy Stone had a job with Olivia Records, which is was a feminist recording studio. And some anti-trans activists found out about this and started sending them abusive messages. And it was all like rude letters in those days, not stuff on social media. And things escalated, and they were due to go and do a gig in Seattle. And they got these warnings that a group of feminist paramilitaries called the Gorgons were going to turn up at their gig and assassinate Sandy Stone. And they did. They had guns and everything, and camo outfits and stuff. Unfortunately, the security people were able to overpower them and take away their guns, but it could have got very, very nasty. So that's an example of some not terribly nice people appropriating the name of Gorgons.
There's also other good, positive examples as well.
There's loads of other stuff. So if you do a quick search for Medusa on the internet, you will find a whole bunch of images of Medusa as a lesbian. Typically, they're Medusa having fallen in love with a blind girl, because a blind girl, of course, is immune to her horrible stare. And you get some lovely pictures of the two of them together, and she's stroking the snakes, and the snakes are licking her fingers. And it's all very sweet. So there's a fair amount of good stuff on, and there's a lovely image I found as well, which just has Medusa doing this with her snakes, and the caption on it is "Petrify the patriarchy." Lots of imagination going into it. But if you really want to get queer about it, then you need to dig back into the ancient stuff, about actual ancient history. Harryhausen, as I said, thought that the images of Medusa were too pretty. And if you look at images from classical Greece or from the Roman era, yes, they are. They are very pretty, apart from the snaky thing. But if you go further back, if you go back into Bronze Age Greece, sort of back at the time of the Trojan War, then images of Medusa are very, very different. They tend to portray her with a very broad nose, with very thick lips, and her hair, rather than being actual snakes, is in dreadlocks. Now, you look at that image, and the thing that immediately leaps out to you is to say, this is somebody from ancient Greece trying to do a picture of somebody from Africa. And I'm not the only person that's come up with this. There's a quote here from the poet Dorothea Smart. She says, "I thought to myself, Medusa was probably some black woman with nappy hair, and some white man saw her and cried, 'A monster!'" People with dreadlocks, with very different facial features, and the Greeks got the knickers in a twist about it, and of course the legend would grow. But the idea of black women warriors is perfectly okay. If you've ever seen the Spartacus TV series, there's a black woman in there called Navia, and she wears her hair in dreadlocks because it's easier to fight that way. So the question is, were there actually any black women warriors in ancient times that the Greeks might have encountered? And we have a few clues. To start with, there's the whole question of where the Perseus myth took place. If you remember, I said that Andromeda was a princess from Ethiopia, so she's African. And also the location of the Gorgons is given as in Africa. If you read, for example, Ovid's Metamorphoses, there's talk of Perseus flying over Libya. So clearly this is all happening in Africa. And then there's a chap called Diodorus Siculus, who's kind of the Roman version of the History Channel. I mean, he did history, but he was really keen that it should be like, sensational and a bit weird. So he would write history of past times that he got from Greek writers and whatever. And he writes in particular about, from our point of view, about some Amazons. There was an Amazon queen called Myrina, who was like the terror of the Eastern Mediterranean in past times. And she had a sister called Mytilene, and amongst other things, they conquered the islands of Lemnos and Lesbos. And there are still cities named after those two women on those islands today. And according to Diodorus, Myrina and her Amazons fought against a tribe of African Amazons who were called the Gorgons. And he later mentions that the Gorgons also fought against Perseus when Medusa was their queen. So here we have a Roman source saying the Gorgons were not monsters, they were a tribe of Amazons from Africa, and that there was a war between them and Perseus's people, and that's where the myth comes from. And of course, if they're Amazons, they've got to be lesbians, because that's the way it works.
Do you want to expand on that?
Well, Amazons in Greek mythology are an all-female society. What it probably means, of course, is it's an all-female war band. So they lived together, they rode together as a mounted war band. And in the ancient times, people were mostly bisexual. Bisexuality is a natural state of human beings. And as it was an all-girl group, then they would have had sex together, just like male armies would have had sex together. It was the thing in ancient Greece.
It was the thing in ancient Greece. And Medusa, ancient Greece through to today, why is this image still so popular? Why does it endure?
Well, I think it's a really striking image, obviously, that has to appeal to people. But most of what's happening, I think, with Medusa now is the feminist nature of the image, that this is a powerful woman, this is a scary woman, this is someone that we can have as a totem. And there are other things about Medusa as well that you can play with. That she's somebody who's been through a transformation. Right? She's a snake, so associated with snakes. So she presumably sheds her skin. Snakes shed their skin to transform themselves. So you can play with that idea and say that Medusa is someone who has transformed, and now she's this female person that everybody says is incredibly ugly. But we know that she's beautiful because she's just a transformed person. You can use it as a sort of trans icon.
Right. So tell me more about that.
Like I said, she's gone through a transformation. Everybody else says that she's horrible, but we love her because she's beautiful the way she is.
Well, coming to a close now, is there anything we've forgotten to mention?
I did forget to mention one thing about the film. It has the best supporting actor in movie history, and that is the little clockwork owl that Athena sends to help Perseus. It's a marvelous little creature. In the film, Zeus tells Athena to send her owl to help Perseus, but she's very fond of her owl. She doesn't want to lose the owl, so she has Hephaestus, the smith god, make a metal owl, and the metal owl gets sent off. Of course, being a metal owl, it's a bit bumbling, and it has all sorts of comedy pratfalls and stuff. When we first meet it, it lands on the branch of a tree, but because it's a metal owl, the branch breaks and it falls down on the ground, and Perseus has to rescue it.
Oh, poor Bubo. So to sum up now, why is Ray Harryhausen still so special after all these years?
I think basically that we all just grew up loving those films, that it was marvelous to be able to go to a cinema and see these creatures come to life. Special effects were pretty bad back in those days. We didn't have any of the CGI and all that sort of stuff that you get with the Marvel films these days. But Harryhausen's creatures actually moved like real animals. I mean, they were obviously not, but he got the job done, but in a way that nobody else could do except with cartoons.